What if your everyday is easier? What if your tasks are faster? What if you never have to chase due dates ever? What if your life is safer? What if your dreams are higher? What if kaya mo na? GCash gives you secure payments, real-time money transfers, accessible financial services, exclusive deals, and a full suite of business solutions para kaya mo na sumabay sa takbo ng buhay. Kaya mo na to stay connected. Kaya mo na magbayad anytime, anywhere. Kaya mo na mag-buy and sell. Kaya mo na to get exclusive deals. Kaya mo na magpera padala. Kaya mo na gawing safe ang future. Kaya mo na abutin ang pangarap. Kaya mo na makatulong, magbigay ng pag-asa. Kaya mo, GCash mo.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to BusinessWorld Insights. This is the last session of a very special two-part series on Fintech PH, making financial services more accessible and inclusive. Now, my name is Danny Laurel, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's discussion, all about the most relevant issues today to help our country accelerate the push for a more financially inclusive and resilient economy, of course, through our fintech industry, which is very much thriving. Now, the latest Philippine Venture Capital report by the Boston Consulting Group and Foxmont Capital partners shows that the fintech industry in the Philippines has taken the lion's share. So that's around 77% of all Filipino startup funding for the second consecutive year. We've actually, at least this industry has received a total of around $680.1 million raised. So again, 77% of the startup funding. And so with this, fintech can be further expected to, of course, innovate what and how financial services are offered and delivered to Filipinos all across the nation, from the urban areas all the way to the countryside. And this leaves one to explore and find out what kind of financial services do Filipinos need, and how can the country's fintech space, from startups all the way to established businesses, innovatively meet these specific needs. Now, within the fintech space, of course, how can sectors like blockchain, insurtech, proptech, crowdfunding, all of these tech words, wealth tech, how can these different areas meet these specific needs by our Filipinos? Now, today we are joined by some of the most sought-after personalities in the country's fintech scene. We will be hearing from each speaker in turn. And before that, we would like to invite everyone to send in their questions as well, as we will be diving into a free-flowing panel discussion and Q&A. So before I call them on screen, just a very quick reminder to our audience. If you want to ask a question, just make sure to send that in the comment section, and our team will be monitoring that, and I'll try my very best to post those questions on behalf of you. All right, without further ado, let's jump right in with our guests for this morning. Our first guest is Mr. Carl Lyndon Pacolor. Sir Carl is currently the Division Chief of the Innovation and Collaboration Division of the Department of Trade and Industry. He is responsible for leading and coordinating the department's innovation related initiatives and the programs for startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises or MSMEs, as well as the large enterprises. He's also responsible for implementing the two new innovation legislations towards creating globally competitive and innovative industries and formulating programs to prepare the country for Industry 4.0, which is crucial as we develop new products, services, and new business models. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Mr. Carl Lyndon Pacolor. Carl, go ahead, you have the floor.
Good morning, Dan, and good morning to Danny. Sorry, and good morning to our audience. So again, I am Carl from the Department of Trade and Industry, and my main responsibility is coordinating the different innovation and startup-related programs for our startups and MSMEs. So as you know, as identified by global reports, we're actually identified right now as a very young ecosystem for innovation and startups. We are still facing a lot of challenges and the birth pains of building the startup ecosystem. But here in DTI and together with our partners from the government, our vision is very clear that we want to make the Philippine tech startup ecosystem, of course, together with the fintech industry, to make this as an our engine of economic recovery and to be able to be our main driver for inclusive growth and job creation. To realize our strategies, we keep our focus first on growing the number of startups here in the country through a larger and more coordinated ecosystem and promotion of technology and entrepreneurship. Second, we aim to increase early stage funding by attracting more private angels and angel investors in the Philippines in terms of implementation as well of the startup venture fund programs to support the early stages of our startups, especially in financing. Third is we aim to build quality startups by strengthening founder know-how, deepening market reach, and increasing talent quality. And lastly, we aim to expand our global connectedness by engaging with partners as we connect the Philippine startup ecosystem with other regional and global ecosystems. And with this, we are also establishing what we call a platform, the Regional Inclusive Innovation Centers, which serve as a virtual or physical platform for regions to establish their respective innovation ecosystems so that we will move as one and be able to seamlessly pursue innovation with sharing of information, expertise, and also resources. And with that, thank you for the kind introduction, and I'll turn it over back to you, Danny.
Thank you, Sir Carl. Now stay there. Of course, we have a lot more to discuss, especially in terms of the plans of the DTI in helping out the MSME sectors via fintech. Now, moving on to our second speaker, he is the CEO of Fuse Lending Incorporated, the lending business of GCash. He oversees product development and operations and helps enable GCash to provide the unbanked and underserved Filipinos credit that is both fair and accessible. He started his career in the fast moving consumer goods industry, steering brands into a strong leadership position. He subsequently transitioned to the financial services industry, where he had notable stints marked by successful business turnarounds and new product launches. Let's all please welcome Mr. Tony Isidro. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Danny. Pleasure to be here. And good morning, everyone. If you look at the past 2 years, it's quite clear that the pandemic has really accelerated digital adoption in the Philippines. And if you look around us, there's definitely more comfort in terms of doing transactions online or even via the app. And in GCash, we see that to date, we actually have around 60 million users. On a daily basis, we see as much as 29 million logins and 19 million transactions. So it's quite a lot, and the comfort definitely has accelerated. But with that position, we realize is a responsibility and an opportunity to move and to play a bigger role in financial inclusion. And in GCash, our vision is to provide finance for all. And in the recent months, we've taken efforts to move closer to that vision, whether in terms of offering for savings, for insurance, for investments, or even credit, and working with the rest of the private sector And with the government, of course, our goal is in the coming months to help the Philippines move closer to that vision of really finance for all. Happy to be here, Danny.
Thank you, Sir Tony. Finance for All. How exactly are we going to get there? And of course, how far along have we come? We'll be discussing that more later on. Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, our third panelist this morning is Mr. Carlo Edmond C. Calimon. Completing our panelist, of course, he is a co-owner of several companies, mostly focused on innovation, training, and various services that help fellow entrepreneurs and startups. He also guides and mentors entrepreneurs, especially startups, in Startup Village. This is the newest incubator or accelerator in the Philippines, where he is the co-founder and president. He's also the director of Let's Go Foundation, that stands for Leading Entrepreneurs Towards Seizing Global Opportunities. This is a nonprofit, non-stock organization advocating entrepreneurship. Everyone, let's all please welcome Mr. Carlo Edmond Calimon. Carlo, welcome to the screen.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and I'm very, very happy to be here. We are one in promoting startups and innovation here in the Philippines. And as we continue on with Startup Village, we are an incubator and accelerator here in the Philippines. And we are very excited to be a supporter of this initiative simply because we want to encourage other startups and startup founders to get into this space, into this digital space, because that is the main mandate of Startup Village, which is to help the next generation of entrepreneurs convert their ideas, launch their ideas, and grow these businesses. We've been doing this for the past 5 years, and we've supported hundreds of startups along the way through our various programs, which includes our incubator program, pitching program, and even our immersion trip to Silicon Valley, which is called Engage. But this morning, I'd like to share our experience as we continue to match MSMEs with startups through Project Match and Certified Digital Negosyo. And this is where we've actually seen how digitization and fintech has helped elevate the status of our MSMEs through the various matches that we were able to conduct in the past months. This is where we have seen MSMEs become more prosperous when they were matched to startups, especially fintech startups, and in the process, elevating the status of MSMEs. Because we understood that by matching them, that is the only way they can grow and prosper in today's world. Because we all understood that there is always a new way of doing things, and that is actually what we're experiencing right now. And because of the digital space that we are all in, all of these MSMEs are beginning now to embrace fintech and digitalization, right? Because as we have seen and as you have shared, fintech is one of the main drivers for the digital shift. So with that, happy to be here again this morning, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. Now, please stay on the screen, Sir Carlo, and I would like to invite our two other panelists back on the screen for our discussion. So feel free to jump in. I think it's going to be very interesting because we have three representatives from three different sectors, diba? So we have the government and the MSME sector by the DTI, and then we have GCash, which is of course the fintech lending platform, and then we have the, let's say, private sector, which is also led by this startup village. So very, very interesting conversation here, and you're going to be able to tell each other what exactly you need. Now I'm going to kick off with Sir Pacolor of the DTI. No, tell us, because we're also wondering about financial inclusion, not just for the normal person, but specifically for MSMEs. What are their biggest issues here when it comes to funding, and how is the DTI helping them? You know, you have this match situation here where we have funders and we also have startups with the MSMEs. What is their main issue here, and how can we help the MSMEs get funding?
Yeah. Of course, I would also like to recognize, of course, Carlo here, who's actively working with us and who proposed Match. And together with DTI, it has been really helpful for us to be able to match the different MSMEs and also startups to possible funders or the network of innovation actors here in the Philippines. So here in DTI, what we aim to do is actually identify first what really the needs of our MSMEs and startups are, and that's the main goal. To be able to do the linking and matching, we need to identify what are the most pressing issues that our MSMEs face. For example, given the rise of the pandemic and during the height of the pandemic, we've seen that there are a lot of transactions that were disrupted, mainly because we were forced into that no touch type of transaction, and that forced us to be able to adapt new digital solutions specifically for payments. We've also seen the rise of digital commerce, and our MSMEs were actually forced to do so, mainly because they can do physical contacts with their customers. So it's one of the things that was actually the concerns, and through the different matching activities, we were able to address that, being able to provide access to possible providers of new payment systems and new e-commerce systems for our MSMEs. In terms of access to credit, of course, this is one of the critical problems of our MSMEs and also startups. I think one of the good thing about being able to adopt new fintech technologies is allow better channels to be able to access financing. Of course, you have new ways to do crowd lending, crowdfunding. These are alternative ways of getting the needed funds for our startups and MSMEs, not going through the traditional banks. Aside from that, venture capital funding, of course, it's one of the things that we're establishing right now. And last year, we actually launched the Startup Venture Fund, particularly together with the National Development Company. So the aim of that is to provide equity funding to startups who wish to expand their operations and who already have traction. So we aim to do this together with the National Development Company, and what we do is this is going through a fund of fund scheme or either a co-funding of investments together with investors that will be partnering with DTI and NDC.
Very interesting. I think, Sir Edmund, you can add to that. No, what I'm getting here is that as an MSME, there's difficulty in having access to finance, and if you partner with someone, with more access to this, perhaps a fintech, a new startup player, that increases your chances of getting equity. How does this work exactly? Are there more people, VC funders, investors? Is that easier to go to than the typical bank, for these MSMEs?
Well, for the MSMEs in particular, our MSME friends are actually looking for various options in terms of access to finance. And that includes banks, microfinance. Now coming out are crowdfunding platforms. But at the same time, you also have these grants, as mentioned by Sir Carl, and even grants coming from the OST and even the ICT are very much available, both for startups, innovations in particular. But I think that from a VC perspective, the attention is really more focused on the startups who are in this space, in the fintech space, primarily because we do understand that there are a lot of unbanked Filipinos here. And that is why those who are able to bridge that gap becomes more interesting for the venture capitalists or venture funding because there is a huge opportunity for growth and upside for this particular segment. And this is why attention is being placed. As you shared earlier, 77% of the funds raised over the past couple of years has always been focused on fintech solutions. And take note that the fintech solutions are not necessarily focused on funding, but also providing transactions that Filipinos can take advantage of on a day-to-day basis, whether it's similar to GCash, where transactions are being placed on their phones, or whether it's helping facilitate transactions such as HR payments or salary payments or even disbursements and so on. These are providing ease of access for Filipinos to really transact better and easier. So that is why VCs and angel investors have placed their most of their attention on this particular segment.
Okay, thank you for that. Sir Tony, GCash, we are all using it obviously, and it's mainly used for, as what was mentioned earlier on by Sir Edmund, just facilitating payments. Now you are pushing it a bit further into lending. And first, it might have been, lending on a personal basis from what we have in our app, but now you're looking at even bigger plans, perhaps maybe lending to MSMEs. Give us a bigger idea of why you think that's the next step for GCash. Why is that something that you want to take on? Because this is a major issue, diba? Lending even for banks is so hard to gauge the credit quality of people. How confident are you that the MSMEs can pay back? That these are reliable kinds of business to be venturing in.
What we're seeing, Danny, from our own research is that half of Filipinos have some form of loan, but only 20% have access to formal loans, which means most of Filipinos loan from or borrow from family or friends, or unfortunately from loan sharks, where as you could imagine, as we know, interest rates can be downright prohibitive, if not abusive, and that also exposes them to unfair collection practices. No? And that includes customers on one hand, ordinary customers such as us, but also entrepreneurs. And so in GCash, one of our thrusts, and I talked about providing finance for all earlier, is to provide credit to ordinary customers, but as well as to micro entrepreneurs. We've seen a surge of micro entrepreneurs in the past 2 years with the pandemic, and access, as rightly pointed out earlier, is definitely one of the challenges. Having to go to, let's say, a more formal institution such as a bank, for one, may be a challenge, but also the product fit. No, in some cases, for a micro entrepreneur where the need is a smaller amount than what traditional banks would offer, that is the challenge, and that is where we at GCash can provide loan products for micro entrepreneurs and customers.
Okay, Sir Carl, for the types of loans that are being provided by fintechs, does this serve specific sectors that the DTI is looking at? For example, the micros, talaga, the really smallest enterprises. Is that the gap that's being filled by the fintechs? Whereas if you start growing bigger and bigger, are they supposed to be eligible for traditional banks, or are you seeing fintechs here sort of replacing traditional banks in terms of providing access across the board?
Yeah. So basically, the good thing about what we're talking about, fintech available, is the inclusion part, wherein those that were untapped before, or the ones, as you mentioned, in the micro space, these types of services are now made available as alternatives from the traditional ones. Um, Most of our MSMEs are, and in terms of composition, majority of our MSMEs are in the micro and small space. So these are the ones who really have, must say, a more informal way of doing business apart from large enterprises. And in terms of the volume of transactions, it's not as big as what we see in terms of what banks are really attracted, or in terms of risk-wise, are attracted to provide the needed capital to support these types of businesses. So what we see right now is really, these types of new startups to be able to provide this financing alternatives to these micro or small enterprises, because of the new algorithms that they can that these platforms provide, to be able to vet these types of transactions, more likely personal transactions, if I may say. So these types of new, such as Gcash and other platforms, provide that new new way of being able to provide that needed finance and support to be able to bridge the needed financing for our micro entrepreneurs and small enterprises.
Okay. I'm going to ask a more, let's say, controversial question, no? Because a lot can call themselves a fintech, and some loans, a lot of loan sharks, so to speak, as was mentioned by Tony Isidro, can repackage their business models and say they are fintechs. They're helping for financial inclusion. How can we protect the consumers or businesses from these kinds of from these kinds of businesses, especially in this period? There are a lot of scams. There's a need for money, and there might be a lack of financial literacy, let's say, when it comes to the interest rates, etc. Maybe we can kick off with Sir Edmond. How do you know, in Startup Village, which fintechs are really going to help with inclusion, and which ones might be benefiting from higher interest rates or getting paid a higher amount back from the loan because of the fact that these people have no access to finance?
All right. Well, the nice thing about it is that we work with our partners as well, such as DTI, the ICT, even BSP, right? To make sure that the fintech startup is qualified and is certified as a legitimate business. And I think that's one of the things that we do here in Startup Village, especially for Project Match, is to vet out those that are legitimate and those that are not yet ready to go to market. So that's something that we do. We vet out by making sure that all their documents are available and are in order. And we also make sure that um, they also get their certifications from DTI and the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, which is very helpful in terms of regulating and managing all of these new players. As we understand, uh, with all of these new disruption coming in, and there's a lot of interest in the space, we also need to protect the end user in the process, which is why it's very important for us to make sure that the startups that participate in the space are registered and certified by the government.
Okay, Sir Carl, maybe you can add to that. Is there a way that you protect the MSMEs? Is there a specific list that you provide with them? Are there checks and balances when you say, okay, these are the fintechs that you can, be borrowing money from, and these are the ones that maybe you might need to avoid? How do you do that? And to what extent are the MSMEs protected?
To our mandate, of course, with DTI, we try to vet as much as possible. Of course, with the help of the community in terms of who the legitimate startups are. Aside from that, we work, as mentioned by Sir Carlo. Of course, we will work closely with the different government agencies who are, in terms of the regulations of who are the government agencies who provide the necessary licenses for these startups to operate, and for them to be able to do services such as lending or micro lending or microfinancing. So we are the ones responsible for that. And aside from that, soon we will also be doing a registration system for our startups here in the Philippines to be able to really vet and check as to who the legitimate startups are, who have the necessary requirements, who are in compliant. This is one way of being able to know that we have verified startups here in the Philippines. And in terms of MSMEs, it's one of the things that we're also doing here in DTI is, of course, to protect our consumers. And as part of this, we have certain offices here in DTI to be able to handle such queries or complaints in terms of those who are working not really as we expected in terms of this types of transactions. So they can go to the different departments here in DTI, and a complaint or frontline service is being made available to handle such transactions and dispute resolutions.
Okay,
So
Tony, maybe you can add to that in terms of GCash and Fuse. How do you differentiate yourselves and say, we are, in a way, micro lending, right? But in another way, you also need to have a GCash account, perhaps a savings account, to make sure that you can pay these loans, diba? How can you position yourselves? You're in between a bank that is requiring much more, let's say credit, that for credit to be available you need to have some sort of collateral, but you're also a microfinance institution at the end of the day. Where are you positioning?
I'll approach it, Danny, just not just from a lending perspective, but from a broader view of offering financial services to a broader base of Filipinos. We know that opportunities is extremely big, with just say two-thirds of the market being banked, with 25% of them having literally no access to physical bank nearby. For lending, I talked about it earlier that only 20% have access to loans. Um, Investment just is such a far off concept for many Filipinos, and so is insurance. And so at Gcash, our goal is to bring that closer. First, of course, by hand holding the customers. For a lot of our customers, it's their first formal financial service. So a lot of hand holding has to be done, of course, as to how to use, how not to expose themselves to fraud. But beyond that, liberalizing access to these financial services is what we think is key for Gcash. So, for instance, for products such as our G Save, there's no minimum balance to maintain. Or for G Invest, you could participate and purchase your UITF for as low as 50 pesos.
Mm.
And for credit, we make it as easy as possible for eligible customers. We don't require them to submit any documents. And basically, with just a few clicks on the Gcash app, they can get the money in their wallet, or use it to pay their bills, literally in just a few minutes. So that we think is key in really leapfrogging financial inclusion in the country.
Okay, so it's a whole suite of products, not just specifically just loans, but it's teaching people to manage their finances, whether it's savings, whether it's insurance, whether it's loans. Now, let's take a step back, gentlemen, and I just want to understand now, because I was hosting quite a lot of fintech events pre-pandemic, diba? And there was a proliferation of these new startups. It was the buzzword back then. Where are we right now in the fintech space? Did they collaborate with each other? Was there the banks, did they started digitalizing as well? Did they cannibalize this market, or did it grow further? Is it continuing to be a niche? Maybe Edmund, you can give us a better idea, especially post pandemic. What happened to the fintechs? How successful has it been? And how have they actually achieved the mission that they were setting out to do pre-pandemic?
I think the timing is perfect at this point because of the pandemic. Everybody's been forced, as mentioned, to adapt to the new norm and to adapt to the use of technology on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of these startups have taken advantage of the situation so that they can get more traction, they can get their products out to market. But it's always nice to see how a lot of these solutions, even within the whole startup scene, how all of these startups are collaborating with each other in terms of being able to use each other's products and services and creating their own mini ecosystems. I've seen also a lot of startups that are using Gcash and other similar platforms to augment or to complement their offerings to their customers, or to complete the whole chain in terms of being able to provide payments. And it is always a welcome sight to have solutions such as what Sir Tony mentioned, offering solutions in relation to investments and savings that can truly complement. It's just very nice to see how the ecosystem is also taking advantage of this growth by really working together. I've seen startups that would say, "Oh, I'm going to use your payment gateway to offer uh, my marketplace uh, for MSMEs or to the consumer, or I'd use your HR solutions, but I will include your fintech technology in this suite so that it becomes more effective and efficient." I think that a lot of startups are really just focused on their respective niches, but at the same time understanding that they need to be complemented by somebody else.
Okay, very interesting. So people are more focused now on specific things and then collaborating. That's very interesting. That's quite a development from what you were seeing, the band people trying to do everything first. Sir Carl, you are in the DTI, of course, trying to get other investors in, maybe domestic or foreign, and invest in these startup companies. Tell us, what are the innovations that investors, maybe venture capitalists, or private equity firms, or even the normal investors, what are they looking at today when they are investing in a startup fintech?
Well, generally, I think in terms of the innovation space, it's not just about fintech that a sector that we are looking at, but mostly in terms of what really our venture capital firms are looking at is, of course, how the team is composed of, how competent the team is composed of, the traction that they have in terms of the volume of transactions and their potential. And given that, of course, our country is relatively growing in terms of doing more digital transactions. I think this is why fintech is one of the emerging industry sectors, particularly in the startup scene here in the Philippines. Just recently, as you know, there was actually DTI exclusive working with Startup Genome. This is one of the global startup ecosystem report providers all over the world, wherein they compare the different ecosystems in the country. And interestingly, as you know, during the height of the pandemic, our ecosystem value in terms of the startup space grew from around $584 million. Now we're at valued at $2 billion, and it's mainly driven because of this fintech technologies, also by e-commerce. So really, in terms of where we are in terms of growing, we see a lot of players going into this types of phase, basically to address different problems such as access to finance, being able to do more digital transactions because of the no touch era. And now we're looking at, of course, being able to be utilize new technologies such as blockchain with the rise of NFTs as well here in the country, being number one even in the whole world in terms of adopting this. So these types of industry sectors are really are like working together to be able to fuel this ecosystem that we have right now.
Okay, I wanted to ask about the challenges that you are still facing, of course. I mean, it's wonderful that, a lot of people are optimistic, especially investors, in putting their money in the industry. But of course, it's not without its challenges. Let's kick off with Gcash with Tony. Now you have quite some use case situations, diba? And you can look back and see what you've done well, what you could have improved at. What were the biggest challenges for you in terms of Fuse and lending, but just in Gcash in general, in trying to achieve your goal of course, being closer and more inclusive?
We mentioned about education earlier. So that's definitely both a challenge and an opportunity to move towards financial inclusion. But also more than that, also we talked about Edmund talked about collaboration earlier, and what we're seeing is that collaborating with other fintechs is helps accelerate and helps meet the challenges. In Gcash, our approach is to be more of a platform for financial services. So, for instance, for G Insure, where we offer several insurance products on personal accident, on health, more recently on pet, even or even your car, your vehicles. No, and we're able to achieve that in fast track by collaborating with several uh, partners in this space, and that approach also works for us in our G Save space or G Insure space, where we collaborate with banks, even and other participants in this space, and we feel that that approach works in really accelerating financial inclusion and speeding it up in the country.
Okay, so biggest challenge for you, education. Carlo, do we have you back? Okay, I wanted to ask you, if you didn't hear the question earlier, the biggest challenges for fintechs in this space. So what are the things that are hindering us, the bottlenecks from really making finance more inclusive and accessible?
I think that on one aspect, it's still about educating the end user, right? It's still educating the market in terms of the benefits, the ease of using all of these technologies and the security behind using these technologies. There's always that trust issue that, based on experience, especially when I'm talking to MSMEs from all over the country, there's still that issue of trust, which is being now addressed by a lot of these startups as they continue to educate the market, so that as they're showing how these solutions are actually going to help them moving forward, how these solutions are going to be benefiting them moving forward. I think that's a great help. And as more and more people begin to use this on a day-to-day basis, there's going to be that follower approach, right? Wherein people are now going to be forced to start using it. Another issue that I believe that we're seeing is in terms of connectivity. Obviously, in some areas around the Philippines, there is still that issue about uh, connectivity and data and internet and so on, which makes it difficult for some of our friends and fellow Filipinos to be able to use these technologies. But it's nice to see how we are able to see a lot of gains as especially MSMEs now embrace using all of these technologies, and it trickles down to their employees, it trickles down to their families and so on, which is great to see.
All right, thank you for that. And I want to ask Carl the same question. No, so mentioned were education, security issues, trust issues, connectivity problems. When you talk to the MSMEs, what are the biggest challenges here when it comes to using fintech for them?
One of them is really embracing such technologies. I have this one example just recently, and just we have actually some store vendors here in DTI, and surprisingly, when it came to the point that they can't issue some um, change to us buyers, uh, I was surprised that they were already using Gcash and offering it to us that they can already do transactions for us using that digital payments. And what we see right now is being able to have more of this education type and capacity building, not only for our MSMEs, which we're happy right now. We're collaborating, of course, with the group of Carlo in terms of um, capacitating more of these MSMEs using these types of technologies to be able to do these types of certain transactions. And we in the government, I think it's also part of our responsibility to be able to upgrade our policies to adhere to the changing landscape of our consumers and also our stakeholders. So aside from that, we have to protect our MSMEs and consumers in being able to use these types of services so that we can ensure that we have the seamless transactions and avoid the necessary complaints that we are experiencing. And working with other government agencies, it's really about building the infrastructure, as earlier mentioned by Carlo, and embracing that innovation ecosystem across the different regions. So that's it.
Okay, I think that was a very important point. Policy making, regulation in this space. It's all new, it's all innovative, but we do need to have certain standards, certain regulations to protect also the consumer space. I do have one question here from the audience. I think I'll throw this to Tony. With democratizing access to financial services such as GCash comes certain risks. How do you balance providing easier access to customers and businesses while ensuring the safety and security of these transactions? I think this was already mentioned
Yeah.
many times. The lack of trust, you know, and scams, and of course during the pandemic, it was even worse in the entire world, not just in the Philippines. Diba? How can we get the trust back?
Yeah, security and fraud risk, unfortunately, will really be part of the reality now, no, as we expand towards doing financial services via an app or online. And unfortunately, there's no silver bullet to this. At Gcash, though, we approach it several ways. One, internally, or we initiate several programs to make sure the platform is robust, and that it's secure from these risks. No, that's regularly updated and reviewed. Secondly, we work closely with regulators as well as law enforcement agencies to really catch these fraudsters and prevent them from doing additional damage to customers. No? And third, really, and we again we talked about education, customer education, and we really can't underscore that enough. We need to educate customers from, let's say, a message as simple as not giving their MPIN to protect themselves. That will go a long way, and it's really going to be a process, we think. No, and again, working with um, the regulators, the government, and with our own efforts and with the other efforts of the private sector, hopefully we're able to come closer to a scenario where that trust is higher and the risk is significantly reduced.
Okay, so very interesting points there. Of course, one very important thing to be investing in is security. So maybe there should be a fintech for security as well. Now, just a reminder, viewers here, that the floor is open for any questions. And while we wait for that, I did want to ask, maybe, if I'm not too sure if we have time, but what is for you post-pandemic, right now, no, in this very difficult high inflation environment, where consumers pockets are being burned also by presyo ng bilihin, what is the number one most pressing financial need? And in your opinion, in the short-term situation that we have, maybe DTI can tell us more.
Yeah, this is actually one of the things that, of course, previously we've been working on, and through the use of technology as well, providing an online price monitoring system through the platform. It's already available, and it's being upgraded to be able to provide the consumers the prevailing prices of basic commodities and necessities. And it's part of the responsibility, of course, of DTI to be able to bring that information to our consumers so that they know that they are still getting the value of money for money despite the inflation that we are facing. So it's one of the things that we're continuously working on, and also in terms of how we can access data from all across the different regions. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing, of course, that we are now digitally enabled, and so these data sets are really important for us to be able to check and quickly know as to who or where possible fraudsters or those scammers out there, to be able to monitor the different price fluctuations being put out there.
Super interesting. Very good answer, no? The practical price monitoring system. All right, Edmond, your thoughts. What is the most pressing financial need in our situation right now?
Well, I think that especially for business people, it's really access, right? Access to the financial tools, and I believe our friends from Gcash are moving in the right direction. But I've also encountered several startups that are trying to bridge this gap, especially for the individual or the consumer we're in. Alam naman natin yung situations na that sometimes employees kailangan bumali, right? And that is the time when they actually are, you know, uh, forced to go into informal sources for their capital or for their what they call this, for their daily needs, right? And I've seen some startups trying to bridge that gap so that because there's a need for us to come up with better solutions that are more secure and that are more trustworthy. That don't also take advantage of the situations of our fellow Filipinos. But I think access to finance, especially for business people, to help bridge the challenging times, especially with cash flow concerns right now, would be very, very critical as we move forward.
Very good point. So very urgent right now, in this recovery period, to have immediate support, no? Whether that's from the financial system, whether that's from fintechs, whether that's from VCs. And finally, Sir Tony, as you know, you've been looking at Gcash, as you've been looking at the users, what is the most pressing financial need for Filipinos at the moment?
I agree with Edmond that expansion to financial services is really the big opportunity. But among them, and particularly in GCash, our priority is really to expand the lending business, where we see a lot of need for Filipinos. I talked about how only 20% have access to formal loans, and we want to help address that. In the lending business, we're seeing some customers loan for daily needs such as paying for electricity bill, and or paying water bills, or buying grocery for their family for the week or for the month. And so those are the needs that are pressing, and which at Gcash we hope to address by extending credit that is not only accessible but is transparent and fair.
Okay, so thank you for that. That was a very clear point as well, no? I guess yung pag mahirap yung panahon, we need to help them by providing access to finance. That's the only way that we can do that. All right, I guess we might not have time for any more questions, so I will proceed to your closing remarks. But you know, maybe keep in mind question in mind when you do your closing remarks. What innovation is needed in the fintech sector to address, you know, the changing times at the moment? What's the most important innovation that you would like to see? Let's kick off with Sir Carl.
Yeah, I think a lot has been talked about moving into how fintech or is delivered or financial services is delivered. But one of the things that it is also important to take note of is innovating on security or taking note of cybersecurity, being able to protect, of course, the different identities of probably the lenders or even the consumers in terms of doing these transactions. Since we're moving into this space, it's really important that we are protected. And of course, as earlier mentioned, fraud is there, and it's really difficult. So one of the things that I think we have to strengthen in terms of our innovation capabilities is working on cybersecurity.
Okay, very specific answer there and great way to close. So cybersecurity needs more help. Sir Edmund.
Yes, from my perspective, not just cybersecurity, but I think we need to continue to really educate the market on the benefits of using all of these various fintech solutions that are already available. I believe that, especially with companies like Gcash and even some of the startups that we work with, innovation will always be a part of it. But I think that educating the market on the benefits of using all of these various types of fintech solutions, whether it's for payments, for transactions, for exchange, for financing, and so on. It would really truly help them as individuals and as entrepreneurs or business owners. So I believe that we just need to continue to innovate and educate them on these benefits.
Okay, so fundamentalist muna, no? First, we need to educate, and then maybe the innovations will take fruit. Okay, and finally, Sir Tony, maybe to close, are there innovations needed at this moment, or are we going to stick to the basics of financial education for the time being?
The road to financial inclusion is admittedly a long one, and you're right, Danny. A lot of innovation, and particularly on the product side, has to happen, and particularly in terms of making access easier and breaking down barriers to situations where there were previously, or and providing access to where there was none or where it was limited previously. So whether that's in terms of investment or savings or credit, probably even crypto, the goal is really to liberalize and make that access easier so that more Filipinos can avail of financial services.
Okay, so thank you so much to our panelists. I think clear answers there. Cybersecurity, easier access, no, not just access, diba? According to Sir Tony, and then stick to the fundamentals, better understanding of why we need certain products, better financial literacy for the Filipino people. So thank you so much. That was, of course, Mr. Carlin Don Pacolor of the DTI, Mr. Tony Isidro of Fuse or of Gcash, and Mr. Carlo Edmond C. Calimon of Startup Village. Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure speaking with you all today. All right, and ladies and gentlemen, before I let you go, I would like to thank Maya and Gcash for sponsoring this event, and a huge thanks as well to our partners. We have with us the British Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, the Financial Executive Institute of the Philippines, the Makati Business Club, the Management Association of the Philippines, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and of course, our media partner, the Philippine Star. And to everyone who joined in today's discussion, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. And do join us again in the next sessions of Business World Insights. You can follow Business World online to be updated on our webinars and our other projects. Again, my name is Danny Laurel. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much. I'll see you all again in the next session of Business World Insights. Have a good afternoon.
Life is... Good morning. 'Cause you can pay anywhere, anywhere. 'Cause you can pay and go, pay and go. Grabe! You can pay anytime, anytime. Ganda! 'Cause you can pay